I never planned to work at a roadside diner. It wasn't part of some lifelong dream, and it certainly wasn't where I thought I'd end up at 24. But after a string of bad decisions, a busted car, and a landlord who didn't care about excuses, the place felt like the only option left. It sat on the edge of Highway 19, a lonely stretch that cut through flat farmland and miles of empty woods. The neon sign buzzed in a tired red glow, flickering every few seconds as though it hated being alive as much as I did. The first time I saw it, I thought it looked forgotten, like the kind of place you'd see on a road trip, mention once, in passing, and then realize years later you couldn't remember the name. The letters above the door just read Diner in faded paint. No branding, no charm. It was the sort of building that seemed to exist out of obligation rather than choice. I told myself the job was temporary, just long enough to save up, get the car fixed, maybe move somewhere better. That was the plan. Simple, practical, temporary. But the longer I stayed, the stranger it became. The first night on shift, the silence hit me hardest. I expected a hum of voices, the clatter of silverware, maybe a trucker or two passing through. Instead, the diner sat empty. The booths were clean, the counters polished, but no one came inside. Only the sound of the refrigerator motor in the kitchen, rattling like it was struggling to breathe. And then, just before midnight, the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, startled, expecting a late-night traveler. The man who entered wore a suit too old for fashion, something from decades back. He had a neatly combed haircut and carried himself like someone who had forgotten what year it was. He sat at the counter, smiled politely, and asked me, very clearly, "What year is it tonight?" At first I thought he was joking. Maybe he was drunk. I laughed nervously and said the year. He nodded, but the look in his eyes didn't change like he was memorizing the answer. Then he ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He never touched it. By 1 a.m., he left without a word, slipping into the night like he had never been there at all. When I looked out the window, the highway was empty. The second night, a woman came in. Her hair was pinned up, her dress patterned like something I'd only seen in old photographs. She asked me the same thing. "What year is it?" I gave her the answer, trying to keep my voice steady. She smiled faintly, as though I'd told her something sad. She ordered apple pie, but never took a bite. By the third night, I started to notice the clock above the register. It ticked, the hands moving, but the time never matched my phone. Some nights it was ahead, others it lagged behind. Once, it stopped, completely stuck on 11:59. Though the minutes continued to pass on my watch, I should have left, but something about the place held me there. Part of it was money, sure, but there was also a pull, like gravity, keeping me rooted behind that counter. I told myself it was curiosity, that if I stayed just a little longer, I'd understand what was going on. The regular world seemed to blur outside those glass doors. The longer I stood in that diner, the more I wondered if anyone remembered it at all, because when I mentioned the job to people in town, their faces always went blank. They'd tilt their heads, squint, and say they'd never heard of a diner on Highway 19. And yet, every night, the customers kept coming, and every night, they kept asking me the same question. "What year is it tonight?" When I first took the job, I didn't get much of an interview. The owner, a man named Curtis, sat across from me in the back booth. He was built like an aging linebacker, with shoulders too wide for the diner's narrow vinyl seats. His hair had thinned to wisps, but his eyes, pale watery blue, were sharp in a way that made me feel pinned in place. He didn't ask about my experience. He didn't ask why I needed the job. He didn't even ask if I could cook. Instead, he slid a folded piece of paper across the table. The edges were yellowed, the creases soft from being handled too many times. "These," he said in a low voice, "are the rules." At first I thought he was joking, but when I picked up the paper, I realized he wasn't smiling. There were 7 rules, typed in fading ink. 1. Always greet the customer, no matter how strange they look. Curtis tapped the first line with a blunt finger. They'll expect it, he said. If you ignore them, they get restless. You don't want restless customers. 2. Never answer the same question twice. Sometimes they'll ask again, Curtis explained. Doesn't matter if they look confused. Just pretend you didn't hear. Trust me. 3. Keep the coffee hot, even if no one drinks it. I frowned at that one, but Curtis shook his head. Don't let the pot run dry. It's worse than you think. 4. If someone orders pie, slice it cleanly. No crumbs, no uneven cuts. He leaned closer. They'll notice. And if it's messy, they won't eat it. You do not want them to go hungry. 5. Never, under any circumstances, let a customer behind the counter. Curtis's voice hardened when he said this. Lock the swinging door if you have to. They'll try, some nights. You don't let them. 6. If the clock stops at 11:59, close your eyes until you hear the bell. I opened my mouth to ask, but Curtis raised a hand. Don't, just do it. Eyes shut, count if you need to. Don't open them until the bell rings. 7. When leaving after sunrise, exit through the back door, never the front. Curtis looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The highway doesn't like to let go, sometimes. I remember staring at that list, trying to process whether this was some elaborate hazing ritual. The words felt absurd, but Curtis's tone carried no humor. Do you understand? He asked. I think so, I said. He leaned back, folding his thick arms. Don't just think so. You follow the rules. You'll be fine. Break them, and he didn't finish. Instead, he slid out of the booth and left me there with the list in my hand, the smell of old coffee filling my nose. That first night with the rules in mind, the diner felt different. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, buzzing like a swarm of insects. The polished counter reflected my pale face back at me as I poured a pot of coffee I knew no one might drink. I couldn't stop glancing at the clock above the register. Its hands ticked forward, but every time I looked away and back, I could swear they jumped, skipping minutes, sometimes even an hour. When the door chimed at 11, my stomach tightened. A man stepped in wearing a jacket far too heavy for the weather, his shoes scuffed, his eyes distant. He nodded politely, and I remembered rule number 1. I forced myself to smile. Welcome in. The man sat at the counter and asked, What year is it tonight? I hesitated, but then gave him the answer. He nodded once, and his gaze flicked toward the coffee pot. I poured a cup, steam curling from the rim, and slid it toward him. He didn't touch it. After a long silence, he asked again, softly, What year is it tonight? I froze. My mouth opened, the words ready, but Curtis's warning echoed in my head. Never answered the same question twice, so I stayed quiet, pretended I hadn't heard. Wiped down the counter instead, though my hands trembled. The man's face didn't change, but after a few moments, he pushed the cup away and stood. The bell above the door chimed as he left. When I looked outside, the highway stretched into darkness, empty as before. That was the moment I realized the rules weren't a joke, because when I turned back, the coffee cup was gone. The counter was spotless, the surface dry, but the pot in my hand was completely empty, and I hadn't poured it. It happened on my 4th night by then. I'd memorized the rules, kept them folded in my pocket like a charm. I thought if I followed them exactly, nothing could touch me. But rules are trickier. When you're tired, when the silence starts to press against your skull like a weight. The shift had been uneventful. One customer around 11, a woman in a long coat who only asked the year once. She didn't order food, just sat there for 20 minutes before leaving. After that, the place fell quiet again. I busied myself with the coffee pot, topping it off even though no one had touched the last batch. The smell of burnt grounds clung to my clothes. Then the clock above the register twitched. One moment it read 11:43. The next, both hands clicked into place at 11:59. My heart jumped. Curtis's words ran through my head. If the clock stops at 11:59, close your eyes until you hear the bell. But I didn't. Not right away. I told myself maybe it was broken. Maybe I had more time. I kept staring, waiting for it to move again. But the second hand froze, trembling like it was straining against something unseen. The diner grew unnaturally quiet. Even the hum of the lights faded. That was when I heard it. A sound from the far end of the room, like someone breathing. Shallow, labored, dragging air through a throat that didn't work right. I snapped my eyes shut, finally obeying the rule. But it was too late, because I'd already looked. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, shuffling across the linoleum floor. They moved closer, stopping just short of the counter. I clenched my fists against my legs, fighting the urge to open my eyes. My body screamed at me to peek, to prove it was all in my head. The breathing grew louder, inches away now. Something leaned across the counter. I felt a warmth against my skin. Though it wasn't the warmth of a person, it was damp, heavy, like standing too close to an open sewer. And then, a whisper. Right by my ear, it rasped, "What year is it tonight?" I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Seconds dragged like hours. My chest burned from holding my breath. Then the bell above the door rang out. The sound was sharp, bright, cutting through the silence like sunlight through storm clouds. When I opened my eyes, the diner was empty. The clock had ticked forward to midnight. The counter was spotless. The coffee pot still steamed faintly, but there were handprints smeared handprints across the glass of the front door. Long fingers that stretched higher than any person could reach. The streaks trailing downward, as if something enormous had pressed its weight against the glass. I locked the door after that. Not that it would have mattered. I didn't tell Curtis. What happened? The next morning, when he came in to relieve me, I just nodded and handed over the keys. He looked at me once, long and knowing, and said only, "You looked too long, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He sighed, heavy, and poured himself coffee. "You got lucky. Next time, keep your eyes shut. Don't test the rules." I nodded, again, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Because the rules weren't just warnings. They were survival, and I had almost learned that the hard way. By the end of my first week, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin. Sleep came in snatches, shallow and restless. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I still smelled burnt coffee and heard that bell chiming above the door. I told myself I'd last 2 more nights, just enough to scrape together gas money and leave. But the diner had other plans. That night, the first customer walked in just after 11. A teenage boy, maybe 16. His clothes were old-fashioned, his shoes scuffed, but his eyes were sharp and restless, darting to every corner of the diner as though he expected something to leap at him. He sat at a booth and ordered pie. I remembered Rule 4 immediately. If someone orders pie, slice it cleanly. No crumbs, no uneven cuts. I moved carefully, steadying the knife, cutting a perfect triangle. No jagged edges, no crumbs left behind. When I slid the plate onto the counter, I felt a flicker of pride. The boy looked at it, then looked at me. "You're new," he said flatly. I froze. "Yeah, first week." His eyes narrowed. He didn't touch the fork. Instead, he asked, "What year is it tonight?" The question crawled up my spine. I gave him the answer, quietly. He nodded, picked up the fork, and then dropped it. His gaze locked on the pie again, and I followed his eyes. My stomach dropped. There was a crumb dot, just one, small, barely visible, sitting on the plate near the crust. I didn't even remember leaving it there, but it didn't matter. because the boy's face twisted not with anger, but with hunger. His lips peeled back to reveal teeth far too sharp for a human mouth, glistening under the fluorescent lights. He leaned forward, sniffing the pie, then sniffing the air. His gaze slid back to me, and I realized he wasn't interested in dessert anymore. My hands shook as I backed toward the counter. I can cut another slice. The boy stood. His movements were jerky, unnatural, as though someone was pulling strings through his limbs. He stepped out of the booth, eyes locked on me. That was when Curtis's rule number 5 screamed through my memory. Never, under any circumstances, let a customer behind the counter. The boy's steps quickened. He circled toward the swinging door. I lunged, slamming it shut just as his hand reached out. His fingers longer than they had any right to be clawed at the wood, leaving scratches deep enough to catch the light. He hissed. Not like a teenager, not like a person. It was a sound that carried hunger and disappointment. A predator denied its meal. For a tense moment, he stood there, pressing against the door, his face inches from mine through the gap. His teeth clicked together like he was chewing on nothing. Then, just as suddenly, he stepped back. His expression smoothed out. He turned, walked calmly to the booth, and sat back down. The pie was gone, plate wiped clean. Not even the crumb remained. He rose again, this time walking toward the front door. Before he left, he looked at me once more and said, "Careful. They don't give many second chances." The bell chimed as he disappeared into the night. I collapsed against the counter, my chest heaving. The scratches on the swinging door were still there, deep, jagged, undeniable. I didn't need Curtis to remind me what I'd done wrong. The rules weren't strange anymore. They were the only thing keeping me alive. After the boy with the sharp teeth, I knew I couldn't just coast through this job anymore. The rules weren't suggestions, they were defenses. But defenses against what? Curtis never offered more than a grunt when I asked. He'd pour himself coffee, glance at me with those pale eyes, and say, "You don't want to know." But I did. Curiosity was the only thing stronger than my fear. One morning, after Curtis relieved me, I stayed behind under the excuse of cleaning. Once he disappeared into the office, I slipped down the narrow hallway that led past the kitchen. The diner's storage closet was wedged between the walk-in freezer and a locked door I'd never seen open. Inside, stacked boxes of napkins and chipped plates lined the walls. But at the back, buried beneath old uniforms, I found a cardboard box filled with papers, receipts, logbooks, yellowed photographs. The oldest dated back to the 1960 South. I sat on the floor, flipping through them. The first logbook was written in neat, looping script. The handwriting belonged to someone named Ellen. Her first entry, November 3rd, 1961. First shift tonight. Curtis says to follow the rules. He says they're older than him. I thought he was joking, but the clock stopped. I kept my eyes shut, heard footsteps, heard whispering. When I opened them, the pie was gone, but the plate was clean. I felt my throat tighten. Curtis had already been here back then. The next few entries were similar mundane details, punctuated by warnings. Ellen described customers dressed in clothes from different decades, each one asking the same question. What year? Is it tonight? One entry chilled me most. January 12, 1962. He came behind the counter. I tried to stop him, but he was fast. Wrong. When I blinked, he wasn't a man anymore. His mouth was too wide. Curtis said I was lucky it didn't finish opening. The second logbook jumped forward to 1977. The handwriting was sharper, frantic. This one belonged to Daniel. November 9th, 1977. Rules are real. Thought Ellen was exaggerating. She wasn't. December 14th. Asked the wrong question. Heard an answer in my head. Not my own voice. It said the wrong year, over and over. January 2nd. Curtis says the diner isn't a place. It's an intersection. Sometimes people fall through. Sometimes things crawl out. Rules keep balance. Without them, the entry trailed into scribbles. I dug deeper, a stack of photographs, Polaroids mostly, showing the diner at night. The neon sign buzzed in every shot, but in some, figures lingered by the windows, faint, blurred, too tall for the frame. One picture showed the interior, the booths empty, the counter spotless, except for a pair of wet handprints smeared across the glass door, the same as I'd seen. My pulse hammered as I shoved the box shut. I needed answers. Later that night, when Curtis shuffled in to start his shift, I cornered him. "I found the logbooks," I said. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. Curtis froze, his jaw clenched. "You weren't supposed to go digging." "I had to. I needed to know. What is this place?" He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "It's not the diner that matters. It's the road. Highways don't just go places. They cross things. Things older than towns, older than memory. Most of the time, you drive right over without noticing. But sometimes, something gets caught." He gestured around us. "This diner is a net, keeps the road calm. But nets fray. Rules keep them patched. Break the rules, the road takes notice." I swallowed hard. The customers, what are they? Not all are people. Some were, once. Some are just passing through, looking for where they belong. Some don't belong anywhere anymore. His gaze hardened. "That's why you don't answer twice. That's why you don't let them behind the counter. You break the barrier. They find out where you fit in the food chain." I wanted to laugh, to tell him it was insane. But the scratches on the swinging door were real. The handprints on the glass were real. The hunger in that boy's teeth was real. And I realized then Curtis wasn't warning me for my sake. He was warning me because the diner couldn't afford another mistake. That night, with the logbooks burned into my mind, I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way headlights sometimes appeared on the highway, far in the distance, but never reached the diner. The way the neon sign buzzed louder whenever the clock crept toward midnight. The way the smell of pie sometimes carried through the air, even when the ovens were cold. And I noticed the customers too. Their eyes lingered longer. Their questions came softer. Their smiles stretched wider than they should have. They knew I was learning, and they didn't like it. It was near the end of my second week when the diner finally decided to test me. The shifts started the same as always. The buzz of neon, the clink of the coffee pot, the yawning emptiness of Highway 19 outside. Midnight crept closer. My nerves were frayed from lack of sleep, my pocket heavy with the folded rules I carried like scripture. At 11:30, the door chimed. A woman entered, tall, her hair pinned up in a style decades out of date. She wore gloves, though the night was warm. Her smile was too bright, plastered across her face like it had been painted on. "Good evening," I forced out, remembering Rule 1. She slid into a booth. "What year is it tonight?" I answered once, steady as I could. She nodded, still smiling. Then she asked again and again. Her voice sharpened with each repetition. "What year is it tonight? What year is it tonight?" I kept wiping the counter, pretending not to hear. My hands trembled, the rags soaking through with sweat. Her smile never faltered, but her eyes, her eyes started to bleed at the edges, red seeping into the whites. The clock above the register ticked to 11:59. I squeezed my eyes shut. Her voice rang out, louder now, echoing in the empty diner. "What year is it tonight?" The bell didn't chime. I heard her rise from the booth. The scrape of fabric against vinyl, slow, deliberate footsteps across the floor, and then the sound changed. Her steps grew heavier, dragging like claws across linoleum. The air thickened, damp and metallic, like rust and blood. Something leaned over the counter. I felt a presence, towering above me. A wet drop hit the back of my neck, burning cold. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I kept my eyes shut. The rule was clear. Then the sound shifted again, more footsteps. Not one, but many, circling the diner. The scrape of chairs sliding back. The hiss of breath that wasn't human. The woman wasn't alone anymore. The silence was unbearable. My throat ached from holding my breath. Finally, the bell rang. It cracked through the air like salvation. I opened my eyes too fast, too desperate. The booths were full. Every seat in the diner was occupied. Men, women, children, dressed in clothes from every decade I could imagine. Their faces were pale, blurred, wrong. Their smiles were too wide. Their hands rested neatly on the tables, claws twitching just beneath the skin. Each of them turned toward me in unison, and together, in one voice, they asked, "What year is it tonight?" The words rattled the windows. Plates vibrated on the shelves. My vision swam. I stumbled backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The swinging door behind me rattled, as though something was pushing from the other side. I couldn't answer. I couldn't stay silent. Both choices felt like death, so I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the coffee pot. Rule 3. Keep the coffee hot, even if no one drinks it. The pot steamed in my hand. I lifted it high and shouted, "It's hot, fresh pot." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then every head snapped toward the counter. Dozens of blurred, hungry faces stared at the coffee like wolves scenting blood. The pressure in the air broke. The booths were empty again. The diner was silent. The pot in my hand trembled, sloshing dark liquid across my wrist. I dropped to my knees, gasping. That's when I heard it. From the locked door at the back of the hallway, a sound. A knock, slow, deliberate, 3 times. I froze, my lungs still raw from panic. The knock came again, louder this time. Something whispered through the crack in the frame. The voice was soft, coaxing. "Let me in, just for a moment. You don't have to follow their rules. My rules are easier." My body moved before my brain caught up, feet dragging toward the door. The voice was familiar. It was mine. I heard myself whispering from the other side, promising relief, promising freedom. I gripped the handle. My fingers twitched, and then I saw the rules in my pocket. The paper was damp with sweat, edges worn, but the words still glared back at me. Never let a customer behind the counter. The realization hit like ice water. That door wasn't the back exit. It wasn't storage. It was a counter of its own. A barrier. And something on the other side wanted in. I tore my hand away, stumbling back, whispering no, 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 no. The knocking stopped, but the voice didn't. It laughed, low and hollow, fading into silence. When Curtis arrived at sunrise, I was still curled behind the counter, clutching the coffee pot like a weapon. He looked at me, jaw tightening, but said nothing. Just poured himself a cup, sipped, and muttered, "You lasted longer than most." I thought Curtis was the anchor holding this place together. The gruff old man with the pale eyes, the one who knew the rules and had survived long enough to pass them on. But after the night of the voices and the knocking door, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Curtis never looked tired, never shaken. He sat in the back booth every morning with his coffee, as though the horrors of the night were routine, nothing more than spilled sugar or burnt toast. His hands were steady, his eyes clear, and I realized Di had never once seen him during the worst moments. He arrived after sunrise. He left before dark. He never stayed for the rules he warned me about. One morning, I asked him directly, "Why don't you ever work nights?" Curtis froze, cup halfway to his lips. Then he lowered it slowly. "Someone has to mind the books," he said. "That's not an answer." His gaze lifted to mine. For the first time, I saw something shift in those pale eyes. Not irritation, not anger, something colder. "You think you're the first one to ask," he said softly. You think I'd still be breathing if I hadn't learned to stay out of the dark? I swallowed. So you just hire people. Let them take the night shift. Let them deal with it. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, voice dropping to a growl. Better you than me. The truth settled like lead in my gut. The logbooks, the old names, they weren't records of survivors. They were graves. One after another, employees fed to the rules, while Curtis kept his distance. He hadn't been protecting me. He'd been using me. Why keep it open at all? I demanded. Why not shut it down? Burn it down. Curtis's laugh was low, humorless. You think the diner would let you? This place doesn't close. It just needs someone behind the counter. Someone to pour the coffee, answer the questions, slice the pie, keep the road calm. He sipped again, steady as stone. If nobody ran it, Highway 19 would tear wide open. Things would come crawling out. Better to keep the gears turning. Better one soul at a time than the whole damn world. My stomach churned. So I'm just what? A sacrifice. Curtis's silence was answer enough. For the rest of that shift, I watched him with new eyes. The way he carried the keys, the way he locked the register like it held more than money. The way he never touched the swinging door, never looked at the clock. He knew more than he told me. And worse, he was comfortable with it. That night, I considered not showing up, driving past, leaving the keys under the mat. But when I sat in my car at the edge of the parking lot, staring at the diner's flickering neon, I felt the weight of the rules in my pocket. The memory of those blurred faces, the hungry boy, the voice behind the locked door. If I didn't show up, who would? Would the diner stay empty, or would it simply take someone else? The thought clouded me until I stepped inside, letting the door chime announce me once again. Curtis was there. That alone was wrong. He never came at night. He sat at the counter, sipping coffee like a customer. His eyes met mine, pale and unblinking. I wanted to see how you'd handle it, he said calmly. You've lasted longer than most. What do you mean? My voice was barely a whisper. You're steady, careful. You follow the rules. Most people slip by now. I stared. You've been testing me. Curtis smiled faintly. Not testing. Choosing. My stomach lurched. For what? But he didn't answer. He just nodded toward the clock. Its hands twitched, the second hand freezing at 11:59. Close your eyes, he said. His tone was calm, almost gentle, and for the first time, I wondered if I should. I didn't close my eyes. Curtis's command hung in the air, heavy as the buzzing. Lights? The clock above the register froze at 11:59. But this time, I stayed staring. Close them, Curtis repeated, softer now, like a parent coaxing a child. No, I whispered. His pale eyes narrowed. Then you'll see what you shouldn't. The diner fell silent. The hum of the refrigerator, the flicker of the neon gone. The world held its breath. And then, from the booths, they appeared. Figures, dozens of them, sliding into existence, like water seeping through cracks. Men and women from every decade, children with blank stares, soldiers, travelers, mothers. Their faces blurred, their smiles stretched too wide. They spoke in unison. What year is it tonight? The sound rattled through me, vibrating in my bones. I clutched the counter, forcing my voice steady. It's no, Curtis barked. Don't answer twice. Don't give them what they want. My chest heaved. Then what do I do? Curtis rose from his stool, his body strangely calm amid the chaos. You survive, like I did, like I still do. He stepped away from the counter, and that's when I realized he wasn't guiding me. He was leaving me. The figures turned toward me, ignoring him completely. Their hunger was for the one behind the counter, the one bound by the rules. Me. The rules pulsed in my mind like scripture. Keep the coffee hot. The pot hissed at my side. Never answer the same question twice. Their voices pressed against me, demanding, relentless. Never let them behind the counter. Their hands twitched, ready to reach. Close your eyes at 11:59. The clock ticked, frozen above me. If I followed the rules, maybe I'd survive. But Curtis had followed them too, and all it bought him was a life built on feeding others to the diner. I didn't want that. I wanted out. The figures moved closer, their blurred edges sharpening, their smiles splitting wider. What year is it tonight? My pulse thundered, my throat burned, and I made my decision. I broke a rule. I shouted the year again, louder, clearer, a second answer, deliberate. The effect was immediate. The diner shuddered, lights flickering violently. The air split with a low roar, like the highway itself groaning awake. The figures froze, their smiles faltering. Their blurred faces rippled, peeling back as though the answer had torn something open. Curtis's eyes went wide. What have you done? The clock above us shattered, glass raining down. The hands spun wildly, years flickering across the wall like film on fast forward. 1923, 1957, 1984, 2001, decades bleeding together. The customers screamed, their voices a chorus of centuries colliding. They dissolved into smoke, into static, into nothing, and the diner changed. The booths melted into shadows. The windows opened onto a highway that stretched into black infinity. No stars, no horizon, just road and void. Curtis staggered back, pale, face-stricken. You've broken it. You've shown them there's no year at all. I gripped the counter to steady myself. Then maybe it ends here. The shadows pressed close. The diner groaned like it was collapsing inward. The neon sign outside flickered, buzzing louder, until it popped and died. The customers were gone, but the road was awake. It whispered beneath the floor, the same voice that had once begged through the locked door. Step outside. One step, and it's over. You don't have to play anymore. I looked to Curtis. His face was twisted with fury and fear. Don't listen. If you leave, it won't let you go. You'll never come back. Maybe he was right, but staying meant becoming him. Bound to the counter, bound to the rules. Watching others die so I could breathe another day, and I couldn't do it. So I made my choice. I had stepped out from behind the counter. The diner howled as I crossed the floor. Shadows clawed at my arms, cold and burning all at once. The highway beyond the windows pulsed with light, stretching endlessly. Behind me, Curtis screamed. Not words, just rage. I reached the front door. The rules screamed in my mind. When leaving, after sunrise, use the back door. But sunrise hadn't come, and I didn't care. I pushed the front door open and stepped into the road. The air outside wasn't air at all. It pressed against me like water, heavy and endless. The highway stretched forward and backward, a black ribbon unspooling into nothing. No cars, no sky, no sound, but the hum of something vast and alive beneath the pavement. I turned back once. The diner stood there, glowing faintly, flickering, like a candle about to go out. Curtis was in the doorway, his mouth open in a silent scream. His body blurred at the edges, like the customers I'd seen. Maybe he'd always been one of them. Maybe that's why he survived. The diner blinked, once like a shutter closing. Then it was gone, and I was alone on the road, the asphalt beneath. My shoes shifted. Numbers shimmered across it, years etched into the cracks. 1923, 1957, 1984, 2001, scrolling past like the highway itself was a clock. Every step carried me through time. A shape appeared ahead, a figure walking toward me. A man in a suit too old for fashion, his hair neatly combed. The first customer I'd ever served. He stopped a few feet away. His smile was faint, polite. His voice was the same as always. What year is it tonight? I opened my mouth to answer, but the sound that came out wasn't mine. It was Curtis's voice. Calm, steady, resigned, and in that moment, I understood. You don't escape the diner, you just become part of the road. Somewhere behind me, the neon buzzed back to life. The diner flickered into existence again, waiting for the next unlucky soul to stumble inside, waiting for me to serve them. The man in the suit smiled wider. "What year is it tonight?" he asked again, and this time I answered,